name is Chris. This is Bar 911-970, and we got ourselves another live show where hopefully we will get some good conversations going, maybe learn a thing or two, and communicate with one another in hopes of thinking in a different way. Now, we definitely encourage people to use the chats. One thing I want to remind people is anything like cursing or, like trying to start fights and everything will not show up on this chat because remember, we have people here of all ages and we want to make sure not only can the adults experience a good time here, but children as well. So please keep that in mind. If you curse while you're writing your comments, they will not show up. So let's try and have a conversation where we could communicate in a different and better way. And today, of course, we're going to be talking about racism. Now, I can only go from my experience, and hopefully people will share theirs. Um, I've been living in New York. I've lived in New York all of my life. And hello to the people who are coming in. Skull Cage 11777, welcome as always. I've lived in New York all my life. And the area that I live in, when I was a kid, it was more middle class, but you could definitely tell it's gotten a little bit poorer because around here, it's harder to be able to survive with all the taxes and finding it hard to get jobs and everything. More and more people have moved away, and there is a poorer kind of crowd, shall we say. And the block that I live on is pretty diversified. I mean, we have white people, we have black people, um, people from Spanish speaking countries, all over. And I've never once had a problem with anybody. Um, the biggest thing that I want to talk about, if I want to teach anybody anything, is we are programmed to hate. And that's why I use this picture here, and you see it's a picture of Nelson Mandela. And he says, and I quote, "No one is born hating another person because of the color or we could say his or her skin, or their background, or their religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." And that was a quote by Nelson Mandela. And that is so true. If you were to take a baby that was born in Mexico, put next to a baby that was born in Africa, next to a baby that was born in Jerusalem, next to a baby that was born in Russia, and you put them all in the same room, would they hate each other? Would they want to instinctually fight each other and want to hurt each other? Or do you think they might hold each other's hands and probably sleep next to each other and probably try and play? It's the media, it's the schooling, it's the political system that teaches us how to hate. And it's one of the biggest divide and conquer abilities that they have in their book of war. Racism is their biggest card. Now, especially these days, you see a lot of people on YouTube and people in the media always talking about racism. Now, ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind, we have an African American president that's been president here for 8 years in the United States of America Corporation. And yet, you would think that if an African American president was out for more racial diversity, well, you would think somebody, the first president of color in this country, you would think they would be the one that would seize that opportunity. And yet, in the past 8 years, we've not gotten closer. We've gotten further apart. So there has to be some play in this. But I just want to say from my own personal experience, I mean, I have two next door neighbors, one on each side of my house. One is a white family, and the other is a black family. And you know what? I say hello to either one of them when I see them as I go out to my car or to get my mail or to put out the garbage. And I've never had a problem in my life. And the problem is, for some reason, there are people out there that not only racism, but you also have sexism. I mean, choice, hating somebody for their religion, for their point of view, even for what they wear. And I think this culture is so waiting to be defined that we are so impatient at this point and we're losing so much of our individuality and losing our cultures that we're so angry. And when I mean we, I mean the people in general. And me, I mean, I was never taught to hate. I grew up with black friends, white friends, I've had gay friends. To me, people are people. And here's the ironic part. Every now and then, or probably more than every now and then, I will talk about trolls that bother me on my channel. The ironic part is, the people like, and I'll just say partial names, the unit, Mr. Burrito, the Canadian Ham, we'll call him that, and some others, they're all actually white. How's that for funny? I've actually, at least I don't recall, ever having a Chinese or a Mexican or a black person trolling my account. As a matter of fact, any African Americans that have ever come here, as far as I've interacted with, have been actually very civil. I used to date a girl who was Puerto Rican. She was half Puerto Rican and half French. And it was funny when she said to me I was the first white guy she ever dated. Now, she looked like a French girl. So I was taken back by that. I was like, what do you mean, white guy? And she said, well, I'm mostly Spanish. And she lived in the Bronx. And I would go, because I used to work in Manhattan at the time. I used to work for TWA, which back then we used to say stands for the wrong airline. And at probably around midnight, we would go meet up. Now, I would be taking the train from Manhattan into the Bronx by myself, and never once had any problems with anybody. And I think it's like anything in this world. If you're out looking for trouble, you're probably going to get it. But what we have to understand is that racism is something that is primarily taught. It's either taught by our parents, by our relatives, by our friends, by our schools. I mean, if you think about just when they teach history, the way they teach it, how many situations you've been educated about in school is all about racism, where somebody wanted to hurt someone else based on the color of their skin or the type of religion they have. And until we can find a way to realize, and you need real eyes to be able to realize, that we are all human beings. And it doesn't matter what color your skin is, because if you're a white person and you go tanning every day, well, you're going to have a brown-colored skin. If we all bleed the same way, we all have, with a few exceptions, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, 2 ears, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 heart, located primarily in the same exact spot. So whether a person is gay, whether they are Mexican, whether they are an atheist, whether they decide to pierce their body up and down, until we can understand that people are allowed their way of expression. And if you think about it, a lot of times some people are depressed or angry or lonely, and they're doing things to try and find out who they are. And you notice a lot of these things happen when we're younger. We're trying to figure out, okay, who am I? What is my purpose in life? And we get very confused, and we'll go through different phases. And the last thing we need is people always bashing and putting us down. Now, not liking somebody's one thing. I was always taught by my parents, especially my mother, that if you had nothing nice to say, you say nothing at all. Now, that's not always easy, considering I was born in New York. I'm a Scorpio, and I'm about 50% Sicilian Italian. That's why you could see sometimes I want to defend myself here, because, if you're an Italian, and there we go into race with it, that, you understand what I mean when people come at you. But for the most part, I'm not out seeking trouble. And when I don't like somebody, I don't like them because they're not a good person. But I don't go out of my way to hurt those people. It's like that song, well, it's supposed to be live and let die, but I would rather have it live and let live. Because a person, as long as they are not infringing on our rights and preventing you from being who you are, then why should it matter what somebody else does? And I've mentioned this before in other videos, for example. When it comes to the gay community, I don't agree with it, but I cannot or will not ever stop somebody else from doing what their freedom of choice is allowing them to want to do, as long as they are 2, 3, 20 people or whatever that are happy with what they're doing and they're consenting adults. Then who am I to try and stop them or attack them for it? The same thing with the color of our skin. I mean, how much genocide have we had throughout history where we slaughtered people to the point where, for example, how often do you run into a Native American Indian? How many of you have ever run into a Mayan or an Aztec? It's just sad that because of different ways of thinking, that we feel the need to hurt people. We are supposedly technologically advanced. We're supposedly more sophisticated, more civilized. And yet, time and time again, we are hurting people when we should just leave them alone, and let them do what they choose to do. If you want to worship cabbage, I might think that's strange. You might think that's strange. Everybody around you might think it's strange. But if it's something that you feel comfortable with and it makes you feel good inside and it's not harming anyone, I fail to see the problem with this. And this is where we need to focus if we want a better world. And that is the problem with separation when it comes to countries and race and religion and sexual preference and anything. And we're getting to the point now that we as a people are so angry. And I think it's because what governments have done to us. We are not supposed to be naturally angry people. Do you ever see a bunch of little babies all angry? Or are they always laughing at the most ridiculous things? You could take a little set of keys and dangle them in front of a baby, and they will laugh hysterically. So we are born with love, with happiness, with joy, with the willingness to explore. And it's society that brings us down and says, no, you can't, or no, you gotta stay away from that group of people, and no, you can't think that way, or how dare you dress inappropriately. And I'll share a story one time that I remember back in the late 90s. I was working for this carpet place. I was doing carpets and linoleum at the time. And the person that I was doing the carpets with was a very religious person. And as we were doing the carpets as stairs, and if you've ever done carpets on stairs, it takes a couple of hours to do sometimes, cutting everything up, stapling it, and putting it all in the right way. He was talking all about his religious stuff. And he actually got me to the point, it's like, you know what? Let me give it a try. And I went to this church that following Sunday, and I mean, I dressed up, but I wasn't wearing a suit and tie, but I was wearing a button shirt. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was wearing a white button shirt and dressed what I thought to be appropriate. And there were plenty of people in there. It was kind of like a gospel church, which was kind of strange for me at the time because I never saw anything like that before. But I went by myself just to kind of see. And the preacher, and again, I remember this like it's yesterday, and it's got to be, a couple of decades ago at this point, which is sad how time flies. But they were talking about how some of the people there were not dressed appropriately and how they should be dressed up when they go into the, quote, house of God. And I was so turned off by that. Because I was thinking, well, wait a minute. Why, if there is a God or gods or whatever, and I'm just going to base it on the God that I was supposedly going to worship at that time, I'm Catholic. It's like, why would that God, if they're a loving God, why would they care what clothes you were wearing? As long as you were wanting to preach love, as long as you were hearing their gospel of truth and wanting to help people, why should dressing up matter? And it actually turned me off and made me never want to go there again. And it's so easy for television shows, the television programming, and for your schools and your family to say, oh, well, stay away from those people. And we never ask, well, why? What is the difference between me and a Chinese person, or an African woman, or a gay man? What is the difference other than a few different choices? And why do we feel the need to hate one another? There are some people that follow my channel that with passionately hate me, and yet choose to continue to listen to me and follow me for years at a time. Why would you want to spend so much time with your life filled with hatred? Because it eats you alive. I've had so many people, when they ask me my age, especially when I'm DJing, because when I DJ and I do the karaoke, it's a lot of fun. I play music, I sing songs, I joke around with the people, get them involved, let them, clap and pay attention, and it's a lot of fun. I make jokes and everything. And when they come to me and ask me how old I am, and I say, well, I'm going to be 46 in November, they all accuse me of being a liar, because they say, you don't look at all close to being almost 50. And I thank them, and they always ask, well, what's your secret? Well, some of my secrets is I don't drink alcohol, I don't smoke, I don't drink coffee. I'm a vegetarian. I'm not a vegan, but I'm a vegetarian. I've eaten better. I haven't drank soda in 2 years. But I also say, I don't have hatred in my heart. There are times, yes, I will get upset or I will get mad, but I've never once gotten so mad I want to go and murder somebody. I mean, if there's somebody coming to murder me and I have to defend myself, that's a different story. But I've never seen a person of a different race or a different creed or a different belief system. It made me say, oh, I want to hurt that person. If I didn't agree, I wish them well, but I didn't participate in it. And this is the problem with this day and age, especially with the internet. And I've said this before in past videos where I've said this statement, and I hope more and more people start to pay attention to this one and follow it themselves, their own personal creed, where it's just because you can doesn't mean you should. And it seems like these days, especially the younger generation, they are trying so hard to fit into something. And our governments throughout the world are slowly taking our freedoms away more and more, to the point where you feel so claustrophobic you want to just lash out. And you ever hear the expression, you always hurt the ones you love? Well, most of us can't go up to Hillary Clinton and punch her in the face, no matter how many people would love to do that. Now, I don't recommend anybody try, because violence is never the answer, but there are plenty of people that really want to do not nice things to these politicians who have brought us down. And since we cannot touch those people, and we go to work and end up not getting the pay that we want, and all our money goes towards bills, and relationships get strained because of that, and we build up like a soda bottle being shaken, that eventually we explode. And we lash out, and a lot of times we lash out on easy targets. Instead of realizing that when we were born like with what Nelson Mandela said, we were born with the natural ability to love. And until we can see that as a strength and not a weakness, how are we ever going to get to the point of true unity all around the world? And I know that might even seem like a pipe dream, but it's not impossible. It only takes you, instead of reacting all of the time, to just stop and think and say, wait a minute, what will be the consequences of my actions? Instead of us just at the heat of the moment, because of frustration or because of anger or whatever, we use that as an excuse to just react. And that is why throughout the history of this channel, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm not always right, I don't claim to be. When you're not part of a corrupt system, half the time all you can do is make your best guess. But I've tried to teach people to use their brains better. Your brain is a computer, it is also a muscle. And like any muscle, if you don't use it properly, it becomes weaker. And we've been so conditioned to hate people. And the ironic part is, like I said, in case you missed the beginning of this video, we have a black president. And yet there is more diversity now and more interracial tension than ever before. And that is what's creating things like Black Lives Matter. And of course, Black lives do matter. But the problem with that kind of movement is it's a form of segregation, because instead of saying white white lives matter, brown lives matter, yellow lives matter, red lives matter, green lives matter, all lives matter, it singles out. And yes, there have been a lot of times throughout history where black people have been oppressed. There have been slaves of every type of creed, religion, and skin tone throughout history. I mean, most people would say somebody like me would be the, quote, white privilege, if you think about it. I mean, I am Irish, English, and Italian. I'm a male, I'm white, but yet I'm living in poverty. I'm working to keep sure that I maintain and can pay my bills, but as you get older, it's not easier. I could be easily a candidate for welfare if I wanted it, if I applied for it, but I don't, because I don't want handouts. And my thing is, you can make excuses all of your life. If you choose not to better not only yourself but your mind, you will never get far. There are times, yes, I'm not happy with my situation, but I'm also proud of the fact that I'm not reliant on the government system to come in and take care of me. I want to do things. That's why, I mean, even with these videos, with the little bit of AdSense I make, it helps put food on my table. So as much as I love to do this, it's also nice to get a little small income out of it to help me, so I don't have to go that way. And how many people resort to crime and do, like, sell drugs and things because they can't get by? You are limited to your brain's capacity to think. There is always a way. That is why I also sell those organic soaps and Orgone pyramids, things like that. I have my massage business. I do what it takes. And if I'm going to not like somebody, it's only because they're a bad person. Fighting fire with fire never turns out anything more than destruction. And all we have to do is look at history of all the wars that we've had. Now, I understand why people have revolutions, why people have riots, because they're angry. And we can't really take it out on people that really deserve it. And those are the people in control. So we take it out on the next best thing. But think about it. When people riot in the streets, do they hurt the government? Or do they hurt the local business person who probably is making just enough money to get by to keep the doors open, and we're burning them down and destroying them? Where the governments just come in and just increase your taxes so they can pay for it all, and those people probably lose their businesses anyway. They make the buildings nicer and sell it to somebody else for probably $5,000 more a month rent, and so they can make more money. We hurt each other all the time. It's like they say, drowning in good intention. Whether it's good intention or not, you're still drowning. So I understand why people want to revolt and have revolutions and riot. But has it brought us as a species, throughout the centuries of war, has it brought us to a better place? And if that is the case, where we were in a better place, none of you would be here, because there would be no reason to. A channel like mine would never be able to exist, because it would be a pipe dream and a fairy tale. Now, of course, I'm not going to have millions of subscribers. And I rely on the people like you that are listening to this, whether they're listening to it live or listening to it years later. I'm relying on any of you. If you feel the passion in my heart, and if you see that I am trying to be beneficial to the society in this world, and maybe even speak every now and then a little common sense, I rely on people to help share my information, share my channel, and maybe like a video. It means a lot to me when people take the time to thumb up a video. That is not for ego. That is not for my insecurity. It's every time you do that, somebody else may see the channel that may not have known it existed, because places like YouTube make it very hard for information like this to get out, because they don't want us to actually think we can get along. I mean, think about it. When was the last time where you live that you walked out of your house and you felt scared for your life? Now, I'm sure there's places that there has to be, but right now I could walk outside. I could lay down in the middle of the street, and unless I was dumb enough to get, not move when a car was coming, no one would ever have a problem with me. And as a matter of fact, today I had a little scenario that happened. I borrowed my wife's car because I had a couple of people ordered some of my orgone pyramids, and I went to go ship them off. And it was really raining bad to the point where there's some flooding today. And when I parked the car, I parked it in the only spot that was left, and it was almost like literally like a pond in the middle of the parking lot. So when I got back in and I got into the car wouldn't start. And I was like, "Oh, great! I forgot to bring my cell phone, so I didn't bring it with me." And I'm like, "What am I going to do? I can't call anybody. I don't have my phone. I'm like in the middle of a parking lot where hardly anybody's here because it's raining." And I see this truck driver, not a tow truck, but one of those worker kind of trucks. And it was a Puerto Rican gentleman driving the car, and he saw me with my jumper cables, and I walked up and was like, "Excuse me, can you help me?" And without hesitation, he said yes. Came over and came to help me. And as he was turning, because he was in another part of the parking lot, so he had to drive around to come over to my car. As he was going to do that, another car with a black gentleman stopped and said, "Do you need help?" And I think that's the amazing thing. And I'll tell you how much we're conditioned to be full of race. And I'll share another story with you. Back in the days, like I said earlier, I used to work for TWA. That was from like 1990 to about 1993 or 94, somewhere around there. It was right before they went out of business. And I used to love that job. I'd still be working there today if they were still there. But one of the perks was we got to travel around the world. Now, at the time, I was in my early 20s. And being an Italian family, they're very sheltering, they're very protective. So I never went anywhere. And I was supposed to go to Puerto Rico with one of my best friends. We were just going to go there and chill out and have a great time. And the night before, calls me up and says, "You know what, I can't go." So I was all bummed. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, "You know what? I'm just going to go somewhere." And I went and took a plane to the Bahamas. Now, at the time, it was around 1992, so I was 21 years old. Never left the state by myself, let alone leave the country. End up in Nassau, Bahamas. And I remember, because, I mean, I was working in Manhattan. If you ever worked in a major city or ever worked in Manhattan, people walk by. There's thousands of people walking around you. No one even looks at you. Everybody's looking straight ahead like they're on a mission to go somewhere. And I was just used to that because that's how people in Manhattan are. They're not hateful or anything. They just go where they're going. So when I was at my hotel, I decided, you know what, let me walk into the main part of the Bahamas. And you have to walk over this bridge. And as I'm walking over the bridge, I'm walking on the same side. I see an African American, I guess, native Bahama person walking by. And I wasn't scared or anything, but 21 years old, used to being in New York, you just continue to walk. And as I'm walking by, he looks at me, looks me straight in the eyes, and says, "Hi, how are you?" And I said hello, and we kept walking. And I remember thinking, wow, I can't believe, let alone a black person, because at the time, anybody, some stranger, just walked by and said hello. I thought that was the most beautiful thing. I actually never wanted to leave there. I thought that was so amazing that people actually can say hello that didn't know one another. So my thing is, when you have racism or sexism or any kind of hatred, all it does is it eats you up inside. There is no extremely happy person where everything's going wonderful that has time to ever really want to hate anybody. And if you want to hate people, that's your choice. But hurting others or stopping others from doing something that's none of your business is just a waste of your energy. Because as far as I know, we only live here for a certain amount of time. Now, whether we are reincarnated or whether we're actually spirits of light and go on forever and just go to a different transition, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you're born, you live, and you die. Where you go from there, I don't know. I haven't experienced it, or at least I don't remember experiencing it. So if you have a limited time in the body that you are currently in, why would you waste the limited energy you have to keep you alive on wanting to hurt others to the point where it ruins your day because you saw two men kissing, or a bunch of black people playing in the streets, or a bunch of white kids skateboarding out in the street, or a bunch of women wanting to do jobs because they want to do it? We are so worried these days about what everybody else is doing, what everybody else is saying, that eventually we are going to lose our freedoms to do and say anything because they're going to give us what we want. Little sections here and there say, oh, I'm offended by this. Oh, I'm against that. And they slowly but surely help those little sections one at a time until all of a sudden it's this huge thing you're not allowed to do or say anything anymore. And Lodi Oil says, cultural Marxism at its finest on this channel. Okay, let's address this silly little comment. Okay, first of all, if you think that's what this is, then why are you here? If you're here just to say silly little things, congratulations. So, Lodi R, congratulations. You won worst comment of the day. I don't believe in any ism. See, and that's the problem with people like you and others in this world, is we seem to have to bottleneck everybody in a certain way. And Lodi Aura says, two men kissing is degenerate and it's hurting our society. Really? So two men, which I don't have a problem with, but I would never do it, and I would never sit there saying, well, that's exciting. I'm against gay marriage. I'm against homosexuality, but it's their own choice. But it's hurting people? How? If you are sitting at the park and there are two men kissing each other, will you blow up? Will you all of a sudden float away or melt? I mean, see, that's a very ignorant statement that you made, and it's problems. It's messages like that that show that people like you are the problem. And if Marxism means we shouldn't hate each other and get along, well, that's a lot better than what we have now. So, Lloydie, if you feel that two men are kissing is degenerate and it's hurting our society, then you are part of the problem, and you're one of those people that gets so overly sensitive over every single thing that happens, instead of saying you may not agree with it, but they have the right to do it. So if you have any more unintelligent, very sad statements you'd like to make, I'll be more than happy to point you out. And this is the thing that I'm talking about. It's people like that are what is going to bring down this society to a whole. Now, if you're a religious person and you think that homosexuality can lead to a place in a darker place filled with fire, that's perfectly fine. And 420 Pat Rock says this page sucks. Well, then, what does that say about you that you're here? See, here's the funny part about people like this. They come here to make silly statements, and yet they come here anyway. So my recommendation for you, 420 Patarock, is if you feel this page sucks and you have that opinion and you're allowed to think that way, why are you here? Go find somewhere else. And he says he's going to hit them with a rock, so that shows what type of person. So what we're going to do is, see, when you get to that point, see, I'm not going to hurt them. I'm not going to curse them. I'm just going to block them. So let's see what else Lloydie wants to say. Little boys are now taught they are girls, and girls are taught they are boys. Well, don't people have a choice? I'm a man. I don't care how many people try and tell me there might be a feminine person inside me. I have the capacity to think. I also had parents that taught and guided me. So it all bases down to your own ability to think for yourself. So you're allowed to have an opinion, but to say silly little things like two men kissing is destroying society, that's an ignorant statement, plain and simple. I don't agree with it. I don't want to watch it. I don't think it's right. But I would never stop people from doing it. It's their choice. And if religion is really true, and they will go to hell for doing it, well, that's the price they pay for their own freedom of choice and freedom of will. But them doing it That's not them dragging me into it, or dragging you into it, making you watch, or making you even stay there. If you're uncomfortable, that says more about you than it does anything about them. At least, if anything, they are expressing love. So you talk about how we're taught hate. That's true, but you have a mind, don't you? When you watch TV, if you're watching something you don't like, do you have to continue to watch it because it's on? You should be able to have the ability to change the channel. So if you're in an area where you're seeing two men kissing or two women kissing or whatever, and you don't agree with it, you walk away. You don't go over and punch them. You don't go over and try and make a law regulating what they're doing, because who are you to be able to make that kind of judgment? Okay, Lordy, obviously you're just here to troll, so we're going to say goodbye to your ignorant self. I wish you well, and I hope one day you get true education. So I hope you enjoyed your 15 minutes of fame, but it is now ended here, so you have a good life. But see, that's my point. Notice how I didn't have to curse at them. Notice I didn't have to go into name calling. I try to speak with people rationally. And see, people like that, what we do is we say bye-bye to them. I don't wish that person, harm. But there are a lot of people that choose to be willfully ignorant. There's an old saying for these religious people that they seem to forget about. He who is without sin may cast the first stone. So that is the problem with this generation, and especially this internet generation, is we could make all of these comments hidden behind a camera or behind their computer, thinking that this is just fun and games, when you are creating a different world to live in that becomes more regulated, more full of fear, more distrust and hatred. I don't lock my doors thinking my next door neighbor is going to rob me because they're black. I lock my doors because there are some crazy people in this world. I don't live in fear, though. I walk outside and I see my next door neighbors and they have friends come over. There's a house probably a block or two away that probably sells drugs. Because every time we drive by, there's always different cars that are sitting in front of that house. But never once have I had a problem. Now, do I know that they sell drugs? Of course not. Maybe they could be just friendly people and have parties all the time. My house was the party house for years, so I don't want to assume. But that's the problem. People like that in this world, the ones that think it's funny to go on people's channels just to say hateful things, is why the society is becoming more and more restrictive of our freedoms. Because there are people who think it is funny to hurt other people. But we also have to let it go. Now, I could debate the person. I didn't have to call them names. And when it finally got to the point where you cannot have a rational conversation with an irrational person, you just block them and you move on. But notice I didn't have to scream and yell for this silly little person who probably doesn't really think that way. And if they do, I feel sorry for them. Because like I said, and I use the gay lifestyle as one of the examples, I don't agree with it. But I have no problem with somebody else doing it. Because who am I to judge what is right and wrong? So unless you are God, you have no right to criticize what other people do if it's not hurting you. And that is the problem with this world. So I'm actually glad that we get these childish little trolls every now and then, because it helps us to understand what we don't want to be. So the beautiful thing about that person, I guarantee you they're still listening, is they point out to me why I'm so thankful I'm not them. So for me, they are a reminder of what we don't want to be. And McDouglas says, thank you for not using foul language in your speech. I think it means that a person has a lack of vocabulary when they curse every 4,324 words. Now, that's an exact number, but man, I mean, trust me, I'm a DJ. I was a lead singer of a band. I'm Italian. I'm from New York. I can curse up a storm. But there's times where it's just not necessary. I mean, I can get all New York and everything, but I understand that there are people here that are even children. And it's not like I promote silencing people, but there's also a time and a place. It's using this brain that we have, ladies and gentlemen. So many people are so afraid to have free individual speech. That is why there are people out there that will hate me. It's because I think in a way that they are forever going to be too afraid to think. And that is why so many people may not get along with you or may not agree with you all the time, because you think on a different level and it scares them. And instead of them saying, okay, let me increase my vocabulary, let me research to get on par with this individual, let me get more things that are important, they would rather drag you down because it's easier. And I remember, it's another story I could share. Back in the days before I became a massage therapist that worked on my own, I used to work for a facility. I used to work for a massage place. It was a salon. And before I rented space anywhere, I was an employee. And I remember at one point, I was so good at my massages, most people would always come in asking for me because I was never late. I was always on time. I mastered pressure point work, which is a deep tissue therapy massage, especially on up and down the cervical spine. People love that. I used to use, instead of the, like, what I used to call the Grecian bathhouse or Roman bathhouse music, I used to put on like normal, like soft rock kind of music, and people liked that. People used to request me all the time. And the other massage therapists that were working there were very jealous. And I remember saying to the owner one time, it's like, there were three other massage therapists, so there was four of us all together. And I made the most money because I worked the hardest. I never complained. I was always on time. I went above and beyond. I was very friendly to people, and they kept requesting me. And I told the owners, it's like, I can train these people how to do these techniques that I do. I could teach them. And in the end, they wanted me to not work as hard. And that's pretty much how this world is. Because to them, it was easier for me, the one person, to lower my standards to match the rest so they don't feel or look bad, than to take the time and energy it would take to rise the other three to my level. And that is the problem with this world, is instead of us using our brains to understand that it may take some time and it may be challenging, but we can learn things if we put in the effort, we rather just have everybody say, well, misery loves company, so come down on to us. And that's where a lot of racism and hatred and anger comes from. It's the lack of motivation. It's the lack of effort. Nothing in my life has ever come to me easy. It's been a challenge. To this day, it's still a challenge. But if you notice on my channel, if you go back to the beginning of this channel back in 2012, and I regret now deleting my old channel, Barn on 11967, but there's nothing I can do about it. You'll notice the way I speak now and the things I speak about now are the same things I was talking about back in 2012. You stick with what you believe in. And there is no hatred here. And yes, back in 2012, I wanted to end up fighting one of the people that to this day still listens in and still talks about me, still makes up lies, and is a 40-year-old man-child who used to work for the government. But eventually you have to grow up and see things in different ways. And it's good when bad things happen because you can learn from them. And if you become a better person, then was it a mistake that it happened, or was it really bad? So my thing is, the next time you walk down the street, if you see a person of a different gender, a different religion, a different color, you don't have to go over and hug them. You don't have to, give them $1,000 out of your pocket. Just look at them as you walk by and say, hello, how are you? Do you have any idea how much that would make somebody's day? We're so afraid now that it's like, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing because people are going to be offended. Here's my thing. If you have love in your heart and friendship and kindness in your intention and somebody's offended by it, that's on them. So my thing is, until we can see things in a better way, we are no different from people all the way back to the days of Roman Empire, Egyptian empires, and before, where we think that some are superior and some are inferior. And that is why when I get rarely offended by anything. But one of the things I do get offended on is when either extremely wealthy people or corporate, like businessmen or politicians, call us regular people, common people. Because then that suggests they're better than us, that they're different than us. The only difference is they have different amounts of pieces of fiat paper in their bank accounts. And until we understand we are all the same inside, we are all made of light.